Hello, History 363. So this is the end, the last lecture for the course, and we're going to go down to the Battle of Actium and leave with Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, as the sole ruler of the Roman world. Now that being said, we left off in 40 BC with the Treaty of Brundisium, in which Antony and Octavian have briefly settled their differences. There's been a rearrangement of territory. Octavian now has sort of Western Europe. Lepidus is in Africa, at least has sort of Western Africa, and Antony now has the East. Now again, there is this sort of fourth wheel, and that is Sextus Pompey, who controls Sicily and has a large fleet. And as I sort of suggested, militarily he doesn't seem to be a match for the triumvirs in the way that, say, the Tyrannicides had been. But he can do one really dangerous thing, and that is he can cut off the grain supply to Rome, and therefore leave the city full of 1 million hungry people. Remember, at this point, Rome, the city probably has a population of around 1 million. It can only have that because of exports of grain coming from Sicily and North Africa and Egypt, and coming from across the Mediterranean, all going up through the port of Ostia to Rome. So the fact that Sextus Pompey's fleet is sufficiently strong to block that means that he can cause a lot of misery for the triumvirate as a whole, but particularly for Octavian, when he wants to. Therefore, in 39, there is another pact, oftentimes known as the Pact of Misenum, which basically formally acknowledges Sextus Pompey's territory. He's not made a sort of fourth member of the triumvirate, but it is acknowledged that he controls particularly Sicily, and his sort of right to have his army and fleet is recognized. He's even promised a consulship way down the line for 33. So this sort of makes Sextus Pompey kind of official. But the deal that is put together at Misenum in 39 quickly breaks down. For one thing, Sextus Pompey had been promised, in addition to Sicily, that he could control the Peloponnese. And Mark Antony, who again is the dynast in the East, pretty quickly reneges on that one. And of course here Mark Antony is also kind of playing power politics. He can renege on a promise to Sextus Pompey, but he knows that the leverage that Sextus Pompey has is causing misery in Rome that will impact Octavian, who's there, and not Mark Antony, who's off in the East, planning a big campaign against the Parthians. So by 38, Sextus Pompey is again trying to block supplies of grain and engaging in raids along the Italian coast, causing discomfort for Octavian, who is unable to defeat him. Therefore, in 37, there is yet another pact, this time probably just between Antony and Octavian. There's one reason why they need another sort of agreement. That is, technically, the original law creating the 5-year term for the triumvirs has run out. So as part of this agreement, there will be a new law that will reauthorize the triumvirs for yet another 5 years. Also, Octavian needs ships to help him fight Sextus Pompey, but Antony, who's planning a huge campaign against the Parthians, needs troops. So Antony sends Octavian ships, and Octavian promises, yeah, I'll send some troops pretty soon, Antony, although he doesn't send them as quickly as he could. In fact, it's unclear if he sends them at all. This is sort of the last kind of renegotiation of the triumviral powers in 37. And with that, for 36, Antony goes on his campaign against the Parthians, and Octavian now is positioned to fight against Sextus Pompey. And 36 is a real year in which the kind of basic dynamics of the third triumvirate shifts. Up until now, I would stress, Antony is still really the senior partner, the more accomplished general, the older man, Octavian, in some ways, has kind of been flailing. He's got the really politically unpalatable job of seizing land in Italy to give it to veterans, which makes a lot of people unhappy. He's the one who, when there's people hungry in Rome because the grain supply's been cut off, he has to deal with that. So in some ways, he's kind of the most unpopular, and he's the one who's flailing militarily, unable to beat back Sextus Pompey in 38 or 37. But in 36, everything changes. First off, Octavian finally identifies a military officer, a lieutenant, who can win battles for him. Octavian is not a real military guy, but he has a supporter of Vipsanius Agrippa, who is really good on land and particularly at sea. And so Agrippa now starts to take command of Octavian's troops. Agrippa is also ruthlessly loyal to Octavian. This is, of course, critical. He's not just a good general, but he's a complete supporter of Octavian. And therefore, in 36 BC, Agrippa leads a successful campaign against Sextus Pompey, which results in his total defeat at the Battle of Naulochos. Sextus Pompey flees actually makes his way east, where he's eventually captured and killed by Antony. So Sextus Pompey is therefore gone. And also at this time, we finally get rid of that third wheel in the triumvirate, Lepidus. Namely, after Sextus Pompey has been defeated and Octavian is there with his troops and his fleet in Sicily, Lepidus, who has also brought troops, although they don't take part in the battle, tries to basically corrupt Octavian's army. He basically says, hey, why don't you guys leave Octavian and come fight with me? And this is a completely miscalculated, buffoonish attempt to subvert Octavian, and it fails. And indeed, the opposite thing happens. Octavian basically arrests Lepidus. Lepidus's armies go over to Octavian. And on one hand, we're in such a brutal moment, a moment of prescriptions, a moment where people, great statesmen like Cicero are being murdered and decapitated. And Lepidus lucks out because Octavian doesn't kill him. Rather, he puts him under kind of house arrest in Circii, a small Latin colony on the coast of Italy. And Lepidus spends the rest of his days kind of under house arrest until he finally dies during Augustus's reign. Indeed, while Lepidus is, it seems at this point, stripped of all of his secular powers, he is even allowed to maintain his religious post, which is Pontifex Maximus. He becomes the Pontifex Maximus after Caesar's death. And indeed, then Augustus won't accept the title of Pontifex Maximus until after Lepidus dies of natural causes. So while Lepidus had been critical in forming the triumvirate, he really quickly found himself the kind of, again, third wheel junior partner. And therefore, in a strange way, he's almost so unimportant at this point that he doesn't even need to be killed. He can just be tucked away to live out his days on the Italian coast. People find worse ends in this time period. So with 36 now, Lepidus is gone. Octavian has absorbed his armies and his territory. Sextus Pompey is gone. Octavian now controls Sicily. So this means Octavian is now a radically more powerful individual than he was, say, during when the Pact of Tarentum was being negotiated in 37. 36 is then disastrous for Mark Antony. His Parthian campaign, which had really been designed to kind of give him the kind of glorious conquest that would put him at the level of a Julius Caesar, fails miserably. He attempts to invade Parthia through Armenia. While he has some successes on the battlefield, pretty quickly he's forced to retreat back during a brutal winter, and he kind of has a Napoleon retreating from Moscow situation, suffering horrendous casualties, mostly from the weather and poorly planned logistics, and loses probably half of his army in the process. So that means that as Octavian is sort of victorious and solidifies his position in the West, Antony is now brutally defeated and much weakened in the East. And indeed, the fact that Antony now desperately needs reinforcements and money really probably changes his relationship with Cleopatra. The two have already had a sexual relationship that has started to produce children, but now he desperately needs Cleopatra, who controls the largest kind of independent economy in the Mediterranean, the bountiful grain lands of the Nile, and can therefore provide him with money, supplies, even troops and ships that he desperately needs. And so at this point, their relationship goes from being clearly an alliance, probably also a love affair, given that Antony takes a lot of flack back in Rome. It's known that he's in this relationship, and it's not politically conducive for him. So he probably does love her, but their relationship much more starts to resemble probably a marriage. Again, not a Roman marriage. Antony is still married to Octavia after 36. And indeed, in 34 BC, a bizarre ceremony takes place in Alexandria, the so-called donations of Alexandria, in which Antony and Cleopatra appear at this lavish festival procession. Antony seems to be dressed up as Dionysus. Cleopatra is in the guise of the Egyptian goddess Isis. And they proclaim their children that they have together as the kings of various territories in the East. Territories which, of course, most people consider to be now part of the Roman Empire, that have Roman governors and Roman garrisons and Roman pay taxes to Rome, but all of a sudden Antony is saying, and these are where our children should rule. Now, there's no attempt to actually put the children there as monarchs. This seems to be strictly a kind of ceremonial moment, perhaps more designed for a Alexandrian audience, a Ptolemaic audience, than a Roman audience. But suffice it to say, when word of this ceremony gets back to Rome, it's extremely poorly perceived. It raises suspicions that Antony plans to sort of set himself up as a king in the East. Suspicions that, frankly, I don't think we can dispel to this day. In some ways, Antony's actions in the East and his union with Cleopatra looks forward to a point when the Roman Empire will be split way, way down in the 4th century AD into eastern and western halves, and actually with the eastern half being the more economically vibrant and prosperous. At any rate, this leads to a steep deterioration of relations between Octavian and Antony, and by 33, the two men are finally at war. And the final the decisive action does not come until 31 BC, and this is the Battle of Actium, in which both sides deploy both large armies and fleets. Octavian is whose actually land forces are probably weaker, but Octavian manages to blockade the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra just outside of Actium, off the coast of Greece. And of course, when I say Octavian, it's really Agrippa who really knows how to deploy a fleet for battle and fight. For this battle that is of such importance, we don't actually have a particularly good description of the actual kind of nitty-gritty tactics and dispositions. But the basic outline of the battle seems to be Antony and Cleopatra are trying to break out with their ships. At some point, Cleopatra seems to break away and try to flee as best she can, and she does succeed in taking her fleet back to Egypt. Likewise, Antony fights for a while, and then when the situation becomes hopeless, also makes a run for it and flees, therefore leaving his army sort of behind, now stuck between Octavian's fleet and Octavian's army, which is on land. This battle effectively ends the civil war. Indeed, Augustus will mark the Battle of Actium as a kind of turning point in finally sort of in his words, leading to the restoration of the Republic. Now, the war isn't over. In 30 BC, Octavian invades Egypt with a large force, and Antony and Cleopatra are in no position to resist. Antony commits suicide. Cleopatra is captured, but facing the prospect that she will be paraded in Octavian's triumph, she too opts for suicide, supposedly according to sort of stories, which may or may not be true, by allowing having a poisonous snake smuggled in by her servants in her captivity and allowing it to bite her until she dies. And so therefore Cleopatra is dead. For those of you taking 362, this is the end of the last major Hellenistic dynasty. It also means that in 31, really now one man controls the entirety of the Roman world. There's a little bit of a debate, and I like thinking about, okay, when we create our admittedly modern anachronistic categories, where do we break off? When I structure this class, how late should I take the Republic? When does the Roman Republic end? And it's an academic question, but it obviously, I think, forces us to think about continuity and discontinuity. I think we could make a pretty good argument for ending in 49, when subsequently we're going to see a whole period of essentially rule by military dynasts that certainly has nothing, in no way resembles what the political situation of the Roman Republic has been for the past 500 years. And indeed, there are some historians who, I think everyone agrees that the last civil wars effectively destroyed the Republic. And of course, with Octavian acting as a monarch, we are in a period where we can now talk about, the Augustan monarchy and imperial rule. Now that said, Augustus really doesn't kind of formalize his monarchic powers until 28 BC. So there are some who will say, well, let's take it down to 28 BC. In that year, Augustus actually ratifies how he's going to rule the Roman Empire, takes the name Imperator Augustus Caesar, and so therefore is from 28 onward known as Augustus. And so, at this point, there we actually sort of have a formalized constitution endorsing his truly monarchic powers. Technically, from 31 to 28, he's still just kind of a warlord. In fact, his triumval, the second triumval period, the second triumval's powers authorized at the Pact of Tarentum, those have also expired. So he's sort of a warlord down to about 28. But for all intents and purposes, he's after the Battle of Actium, the sole ruler of the Roman world. Now, obviously, this story continues, and for all I talk about continuity and discontinuity, there are people, plowing their lands up in, some little part of Italy, who don't notice that the Battle of Actium has happened. They just keep doing what they are doing, and life goes on. I do encourage all of you who want to hear the next part of the story to take History 364. I will not be teaching it next semester because I have mercifully been awarded a sabbatical, but it will cover the story. It's likely to be taught by another excellent member of our faculty, Randolph Ford, and it will actually talk about how Augustus solidifies his position as monarch and ultimately the creation of a stable system of imperial rule out of the instability of these military dynasts that we've been dealing with for the last few lectures. I just want to sort of say in retrospect, certainly the events of the 2020 election and its long aftermath, I think, should remind us that Republican systems of self-governance, are fragile and can fail. And indeed, if there's one lesson of the Roman Republic, it simply is. It doesn't matter how powerful or prosperous a republic is, it can fail even at the apogee of its power and prosperity. Nonetheless, I think what is notable is that the sort of Republican DNA in the political system does continue into the Roman Empire. That even though we start to have rule by, again, fundamentally monarchs, there are many Republican elements of Roman political culture that don't go away. And maybe it's just worth talking about a few. One is provocatio. I mean, remember we talked way back talking about the early Republic, how important the right of provocatio, the right to appeal a decision of a magistrate, the penalty of a magistrate, or the death penalty given by a magistrate, to an assembly of the Roman people, and how the Romans treat this as a fundamental aspect of Roman liberty. Interestingly, provocatio doesn't go away. It shifts a little bit. Rather than appealing to an assembly of Roman voters, you now appeal to the emperor. But nonetheless, in the early empire and beyond, the fundamental right you have as a Roman citizen is if you are condemned to death by a governor, you are shipped to Rome first so that the emperor can hear your appeal. And of course, this makes it into the Bible when Paul, a Roman citizen, is condemned to death. But the reason he goes to Rome or is sent to Rome is precisely so that he can appeal to the emperor, and he's probably then executed in Rome. So provocatio, this sort of fundamental citizen right that is defined and established during the struggle of the orders, will continue into the empire. It's part of the Republican DNA we see in the Roman Empire. Another element of the Republican DNA is going to be the grain dole. And indeed, since we've talked about the Gracchi and the struggles over the establishment first of subsidized grain, and finally under Clodius, the establishment of free grain. These are all part of a kind of program associated with popular politicians, populares. And it continues into the empire, into late antiquity. And indeed, the ability to receive subsidized grain becomes a kind of fundamental element of being a member of the urban plebs, of the plebs urbana. So again, here we see this policy, essentially a social welfare policy, that is produced, as part of popular politics in the later Republic, and it continues all throughout the empire as essentially an entitlement of citizens living in Rome. Indeed, when Roman emperors found Constantinople, they set up a grain dole for the citizens of Constantinople. Finally, while Roman emperors, I guess you could say another element of Republican DNA is just the way that Roman emperors clothe their fundamentally autocratic power in kind of, Republican terminology. But it's going to be notable that one of the most important powers of the Roman emperor are tribunician powers. That is, in Roman emperors from Augustus onward, it's possible Julius Caesar had maybe even had this as well, although it's debated. Claim to have the tribunicia potestas, powers of a tribune of the plebs. And these powers, of course, are the power to veto legislation or action, and of course also the power to summon an assembly of the Roman people or summon a meeting of the Senate. So it's notable that and it may be even ironic, that the autocracy of the Roman Empire, one of its fundamental powers, is the power granted to these when we talked about early Rome, these representatives of the plebs, these officers in this kind of plebeian counter state, who are designed to protect the rights of individual Roman citizens and the interests of the plebs at large, and then that concept is sort of picked up by the emperors as a way of framing their power, although framing their power in a way that also suggests that part of the duty of the Roman emperor is to protect the interests of citizens and look after the interests of the plebs and the Roman people at large. And it is notable that a kind of key act of Roman emperors, and we don't see this in every monarchic system, is really to produce urban amenities that are to be enjoyed by the Roman people. When we look at, if you look at what a lot of monarchic systems build when they become builders, a lot of it is big palace complexes that is really just designed for the royal family and the royal court. I mean, think Versailles, way off in the middle of nowhere, this huge expensive project that is designed to benefit the king and his court. Now, Roman emperors do build nice things for themselves, but they spend a huge amount of money and a huge amount of effort building urban amenities for the benefits of the Roman people. Baths, porticos, ultimately structures like the Colosseum that facilitate the amusement and entertainment of the citizen body. The idea that the Roman emperor should exist to benefit the citizens, that idea, I think, really defines a lot of the projects of Roman emperors. And again, I think that really is a big strain of Republican DNA that continues to exist even after, sadly, the Free Republic is destroyed. All right, then. That's all we've got on that somber note. That being said, the Republic is over, but I do hope you will either next semester or in coming semesters explore the next 500 years of Roman history with History 364. All right, I look forward to reading your papers and grading your finals, maybe about as much as you look forward to writing your papers and taking your finals. It's been a long, crazy semester, and I hope the next time we meet, it will be in a classroom at Albany after this whole virus is over. All right, take care.